Hey, Rafael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you coming. So, one of the things that stood out to me was looking at how much experience you have in the gaming industry. Did it start as a childhood interest? How did you end up getting into what you do?
Gotcha. Kind of. So yes and no. I mean, I think that a lot of the folks in kind of the generation before me who got started in games, a lot of them, frankly, did in California and Texas. And so, growing up in Seattle and Boston, um, I uh, I always had a lot of diverse interests. I got sucked into Dungeons and Dragons as a kid back in the '80s, and I very quickly realized that gaming was always a hobby between card games, board games, role playing games, video games. I was always doing it, and I found that I liked to figure out the structures of it, modify that, mess with it. Did little bits of early programming. Um, I had a Texas Instruments TI-99 back in the day. Um, you know, uh, I always wanted to play with it, and I got to a point where I was steadily the one who was always the game master or dungeon master in role playing.
Mm.
At one point, I was doing my academics, I was doing sports, and I was running two groups through different scenarios in high school. So I found like I liked envisioning worlds, planning them, building them, and taking folks through them, and gaming. Video games are kind of the next step of you set that up in the computer rather than you are the game master there. You can reach more people, but it's a lot of the same principles. And I always tell people, like, if they want to understand game design, um, play board games, play card games, play role playing games. Remove the computer as an interface and force yourself to interpret and understand the rules directly. Figure out why the rules are there, how to change them, how to mess with them, and then bring the computer, into the middle. Um, so yeah, I've always loved that. I never really understood for a long time that it could be a viable career. Um, and so, I think a lot of folks of my generation, where I went into professional development in games in the mid '90s, I fell into it. I, took an eclectic mix of of science and art, and a liberal arts background, really wide ranging liberal arts background, and some psychology and computer science, and visual arts and film theory and biology, and just mashed it all together. And then realized that as I got bored of web design, this was in the early days of web design, where web design was simpler. I was like, that's not really what I want to do. And then I got pulled into a focus group session up in Boston, and I did the focus group session, a game studio interfacing with the public, and they asked me, like I think I was there for like an hour after, chatting and asking questions, and I was really intrigued by it. And eventually they're like, "Do you want to apply?" And I was like, "Sure, for what?" And so this is a little studio that doesn't exist anymore, a little mom and pop shop in Boston, but that was called Reality Bites. But they basically said, "Well, do you want to be our first level designer?"
Wow.
And I'm like, "Yes. Let me get back to you on that." And then I went home and I was like, "Okay, what the fuck is a level designer?" Sorry, not
Oh,
not
this
sure if
is
I
a
can swear, but
podcast. You can say whatever the fuck you want.
I was like, "Okay, so." I was like, I think I know what that is. And then I was like, I've kind of tracked a little bit of like the Doom Quake community. And I'm like, oh, right. It's this is like being the DM. I make the level. Um, and so I dove in and taught myself Quake design tools, Quake level editors. I downloaded three different Quake level editors, played with a few, found the one that I liked, built a first level in that, brought it back to the place a week later, walked them through it, brought a, I mean, this was back in the 90s, brought a cassette tape, with like a mix. It was like, okay, this is the soundtrack. This is my level. Play this. They played it, like, okay, you're hired.
Wow.
Go figure out level design for us. And that was the start. So, I mean, just for a little bit of context, I've been in games for 25 years now. Um, yeah, it just started randomly, but it was a random where I was DMing, dungeon mastering, old school Dungeons and Dragons sessions when I was like 8 years old. I I just
Wow.
found I loved it. It was storytelling, but it was storytelling where you figure out the story that the player wants to tell. It's not like, hey, walk somebody through a novel. It's, here's the world. This is what's happening right now. What do you want to do? Okay. And then it's, a good interactive storytelling is kind of like improv. You go, okay, you're doing this. This is the setup. And then, yes. And then we do this. Yes. And then this. And you go with the flow, and you find out what the player wants to do, and you find out what the player's interested in and what they're bored with, and you go with what they're interested in, and you build the story off of that. So I've been doing that ever since. um, and just for a little bit of context, I've had 3 different stints at EA, at Electronic Arts, a couple of Activision studios, um, uh, down at id Software, which is, I guess, now a Bethesda studio, 2K Games. I've built stealth games, open world, action, driving, racing, um, uh, shooters, platformers, a little bit of everything. You go around, and part of it is like going, I can remember distinct points going, I don't want to get pigeonholed. I'm a good designer. I want to design everything. I want to have a lot of tools in my toolbox. Okay, I want to learn how to make open world games. Okay, I can either go to Scotland and join up with DMA Design, or I can go to LA and join up with Luxaflux. Um, Luxaflux was a good fit, and I didn't really want to go to Scotland at the time. So I went to learn open world games at Luxa with Activision, and worked on True Crime. And since then, I've worked on several open world games. But it's like, okay, I want to go do RPGs. Um, at that point, it's like, okay, I should either go to Bethesda or BioWare. Okay, BioWare's interested. I'm packing up and going to Edmonton. So, racing games, open world games, platforming, one thing after another. Just, let's try this out. Let's try that out. And now I'm at the point where I've got all those tools in my toolbox. Got my own studios, and we're building stuff steadily, and talking to publishers and investors, and growing.
So lifelong learners, they don't just stop. What's your current passion? What are you applying those tools to today?
Hmm. Um, so so in some respects, it's envisioning the overall project. Like, one thing that I always focused on early on was not just to learn my pieces, but to learn the other pieces as well. Learn all the pieces to make a game. And it doesn't mean like I need to go and do every piece the best, but a good game designer and a good developer talks to everybody on the team. And a game designer is often the bridge to understanding the others. So it started as like, okay, I need to go off and talk to audio and find out what's going on here, talk to the artists and animators. We're having issues. I'm going to go talk to the programmer, start to understand the differentiation between an engine programmer, a gameplay programmer, a tools programmer. Everyone's got their own specializations. Everyone's got their own subgenres. Learn the whole pipeline, learn how the thing comes together, learn the stages of it. That kind of accelerated when, like I went to EA to work on Need for Speed, and they're like, okay, so we don't really have designers. You're a producer now. It's like you're still a designer, but you're also going to be a producer. Go learn the production scheduling from the other producers. You're going to design and produce together. It's like, oh, at first it's like, that's not what I signed. Oh, okay, fine. Let's figure out this piece. It's good for like learning all these, bringing the pieces together, and then more and more now it's more trying to envision and predict the future. Go from building parts of a game to building one game to planning several projects and going like, okay, let's see what we can do here. Let's see what we can do here. Let's see if we can push our studios or our technology forward. If I want to get to doing this thing, how long is it going to take me to get there? When can I convince a publisher or investor? And are there pieces that I should be doing beforehand to get to there? So it becomes more strategic because I'm still thinking about those individual experiences that I want to make, but I'm thinking about platforms and technology, or I'm thinking like, I want to get to doing this thing. What are all the steps in between?
Is there any of that thing that you're able to talk about, what you're trying to move towards and why you want to do that?
In terms of in terms of some of that long-term planning, something I can talk about is that we have, for where we are now, we came out of a lot of traditional game development. We're still doing that.
How do you define traditional?
Gotcha. So traditional game development, PC, console, mobile game development, where you're making a finite game, usually a framework of about 12 to 36 months. You're making and shipping a game at the end. So we're still doing that. But in contrast to that, like we are now the Roblox their exclusive concert content provider. We're building virtual concerts with Roblox. So, we did the Lil Nas X. Then we worked with Roblox on the kind of a couple of smaller scale projects. There's the Royal Blood halftime show at the Bloxy Awards, which was meant to kind of fit into an existing event a bit more. We've been doing some virtual merch with them and some smaller planning. And then we're doing another event that's going to be coming out later this summer. And we actually have kind of a slowly building schedule of concerts and worlds to launch with Roblox. So those are less traditional in that they kind of peak and valley. It's this very concentrated bit of activity where we're working with Roblox, with a music label or music company record label partner, particular artist. We're doing a bunch of capture. There's a flurry of activity. Then we go off and we build that, and then it gets released and kind of winds down, and then it goes back up. So it's atypical for the development in that it's almost like a sine wave of kind of, because there's a certain amount of like spin up and figuring things out, but it's this slower burst of activity because it's this thing that's meant to be consumed as this live event, and then there's a record of it and it goes away, and then the next one. And so, yeah, it's a very different space from, like you can kind of map out a traditional game, whether it's an MMO or a mobile game, and you've got this kind of curve where it goes up and down. There's a peak, somewhere between the middle and 2/3 of the way through, and then there's kind of a gradual decline, and maybe there's some post-release, but it's a longer process. And these are brief and they're bursts.
I mean, you're putting on concerts. So like the Lil Nas X thing that exploded into the public consciousness. That was a really big deal.
Yeah.
And one, it was just cool. And it gave this indication of where we're going with the concept of the metaverse and where these types of companies want to ultimately take the experience for people towards
Yeah.
being pioneering something. What was that like for you?
Um, you know, it's funny because it's this mixture of old and new. I mean, so I can distinctly remember um, when last year, so John Vlasopoulos, who's the global head of music for Roblox and an old friend I've known for a good long time here in San Francisco, and and John came to me and was like, well. Music worlds are taking a little while. Do you guys want to help us to do the first concert? And I was like, yes. And he's like, so, you know, like, we're still figuring this out. Like, can you figure out what that should entail? Like, okay, we're going to do a concert, like, look at some of the existing stuff. He's like, at this point, you know, we've done the One World, I think it's One World Live Together at Home, which was like a video stream, you know, that they put in, that was, you know, in Roblox but also beyond Roblox. It was a big charity event, and he's like, it's not really going to be that, but like, we need to figure out how to get artists in, and so he's like, you know, I was like, okay, so who are your first artists? He's like, it's this and this. I was like, who's on deck? Let's do that. Let's start you off. We want to dive in with the first one. He's like, okay, it's going to be Lil Nas X. Okay. Um, you know, I do actually loosely know who that is, you know, back then. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go and do research. I'm going to come back in a few days knowing everything about this, and about Nas. Um, but also, it's like, let me go talk to some of my co-founders. I think I know how we're going to do this, but I need to make sure. So I go off and I'm talking to Dwayne Stinnett, who's one of my co-founders and who's our cinematics and creative director. I'm like, I think that they're asking us to do what's basically a, like, it's an in-game cinematic, but just amped up. You know, it's the way that we've built, you know, like, so Dwayne, Dwayne Stinnett, my co-founder, you know, he was, you know, he was one of the first art directors at Blizzard. He founded the cinematics department at Blizzard. And he's like, I think that they want us to build cinematics, but with music and a concert feel in Roblox. It's like, we've done cinematics, we know how to do this. It's going to be different because it's a live running thing, but this process of putting these pieces together, we know how to do this. Let's do this. This will be fun. And so and he was entirely right. You know, like, so I mean, just to be clear, you know, I believe most people understand this. The Roblox Lil Nas X virtual concert experience, which I think is the full name, was live for the audience, not live for the artist. This is important because people have differing definitions of what is live. Our definition is effectively an MMO definition. The audience, the players matter. It's not about defining everything for the artist. You can make it live for them, but look at it this way. Roblox's audience, and this is a rough quote, is, I believe at this point, somewhere hovering around 170 million users globally, across all territories. If you do one live event for the artist, what time do you do that at? Is it convenient for all of your users around the world? Live is important for the audience, not for the artist. Because if you think about doing a concert, and I actually walked John through this, I was like, Fortnite and Travis Scott did it right. You do somewhere, you know, variable amount, 3 to 6 shows over the course of a weekend. But you do them, you go through and you hit time zones in succession. You just take a globe and spin it and go, now one here, 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 here. And you make sure that you can generally hit the Americas, you know, the EMEA, Europe, the Middle East and Africa, and then Asia, and the Pacific Rim. You make sure that you can hit these regions and that you can at least do something that is reasonably convenient for each of those 3 large global regions, so that you don't exclude parts of your audience. And, you know, and it's telling John at Roblox, your audience is primarily kids. It's primarily 8 to 18. Let's not have them going to a concert at 2 a.m. because that's the only time they can do it. Um, this concert was the first concert for a lot of kids, like the first concert ever.
So cool.
Have it be a good experience, have it be convenient for them. Live for the audience is what matters. And Fortnite got this right. We took that and adapted it and grew it and basically said, like, they set up a schedule. And as soon as I like explained that, they're like, oh right, yeah, we need to hit like an afternoon time frame in each of these zones, so in each of these regions, so that it's a good time, it's a good experience for everyone. And like, because the counter is that you go, this has to happen over the course of a weekend. You have to have several shows because also you're building momentum and more people are hearing about it. If you do live for the artist, then you go, okay, so is our artist going to stay up and do a show every 6 to 10 hours for a 48-hour period? No. Because if you think about it, a real tour happens over months, and it's slow motion moving around the globe, hitting one stadium or other, you know, performance structure after another, but it's a steady move around. We have to condense that into a weekend. And so the best way to do that is go, we capture that best performance for the artist. We can even start to think, and you'll see this in the next one, where we have some, Bandersnatch elements. Things can change. We can build, we can evolve and adapt. We can introduce more and more elements of player choice so that they can individualize maybe across a server, different from other servers. But we have to ensure that the players are in the center, not the artist. This is something that I disagree with some folks on. Some folks believe that the most important thing is do one show for the artist. And my view is, if you do one show for the artist, then you don't have a platform. You have a thing that you're going to capture and you're going to put it onto YouTube or TikTok or Twitch or whatever, and your focus is pre-recorded.
Hmm.
If your focus is live, actually live, if you have a platform like a Roblox or a Fortnite, or Minecraft or others, and I aspire to eventually be in that milieu ourselves, then you put the audience in the forefront and you say, you, the players, the audience are important. Your story is always important. It's not the story, the experience that we are going to tell. It's the one that we create and set up for you, and you are at the center.
So people talk about CX, but it's quite obvious that you really truly care about the customer experience, the user experience. What two things. First, how much input do you get from, because the artists themselves are creatives?
Mhm.
What's that dialogue like in terms of putting on the
Absolutely.
project?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't announce our next artist, but I can say that we are literally meeting with them and their collective creative entourage every day this week, as an example, for this next concert. That when we were preparing for Lil Nas X, Nas. So Nas, and he doesn't always get credit for this. He's a fantastic dancer. Um, he's a performer in the truest sense, in that he sings, he dances, he raps. But he had 3 choreographers. He does a lot of choreography in his videos, but he had literally 3 choreographers working with him, and help walking him through sequences that he was practicing day after day, in order to ensure that he and I will say, like, we've Dwayne and I have done a good amount of mocap. Nas was one of the most professional celebrity types to go into a mocap stage, where he just knocked it out. He was fast because he had practiced. And some folks are like, oh yeah, I'll go on stage and know what to do. He had like weeks of basically 6, 8 hours a day where he got ready. He treated it just like he would, a real concert. He treated it in the same way, in that he didn't just go like, oh, I'm going to go do a mocap thing. He was like, no, 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 I'm going to make sure that we deliver the best concert experience we can. And he busted his ass. It was fantastic, and it was impressive. Like, he went in, and we had 2 full days of mocap booked, and he was done fast. And we're like, oh, we've got extra time, and we're adding things in, and you know marketing pickups and bits of b-roll, and just talking about lots of stuff other stuff we can do. But he was fast, and so it's definitely a process to get someone ready. And the more that they can do on their end, the more that the artist prepares, the better it's going to be for the eventual experience. Everyone approaches it in a different way. Like, some people might want to dance more, some people might want to talk more, some people might be like, hey, it's all about the interstitials. We're working with a group right now that's like really stressing the importance of the world building, and just the importance of the sets and the scenes, and almost like the Easter eggs that they like to put into their videos. So everyone does it differently. Like, Nas had an overall style, but his focus was on the choreographed dance performance. The group that we're doing now, they're much less focused on that. They're not going to be dancing, but instead, they're going to be moving around, but they're very focused on adding visual elements that harken to different albums of theirs. So it's all about building the experience in the way that you can with the artist who wants to.
So, you being an artist, how would you describe your flavor?
Mm. My flavor of what?
So, one person likes to focus on the world building and Easter eggs, and somebody is into the choreography. Somebody else might be into sound design, and trying to, what's you?
Gotcha. So I've always been a world builder, and that goes back to role playing games. I can build a map, I can write fiction, I can think about the rules and structures that fit that together. But yeah, to me, what that means is that like, just to peel back some of the strategy, like, as we're doing successive concerts with Roblox, as we're talking to other publishers and developers, we're starting to think about what could be our own platform and space to allow people to do performance. I love working with Roblox. We're going to continue. Not quite announcing things yet, but what I will say is that a more open platform, and a more technologically advanced platform, which is just a different choice. Like, Roblox has a largely kids audience. That on a certain level, it's digital Legos for kids. It's fantastic. It's grown to the point of where half the kids in the U.S. connect in on Roblox. They have a thing there. I want to create a metaverse platform for people to be able to enable performance, allow people to go in and perform. And that could be amateurs, it could be professionals, it could be the biggest band in the world, or it could be someone who's literally busking on subways before pandemic, or like, just as an example, um, Justin Bieber and The Weeknd were discovered on YouTube. Lil Nas X was discovered on TikTok. How long will it be before somebody is discovered playing in a virtual world? I'd like to help facilitate that. That's that's the sort of thing I want to create. And to do that, I believe that you have to create a world that people want to inhabit. So not calling out certain companies too much, but I love the idea of virtual performance. I think that that's mostly a space in terms of like the huge acts. That's a space that a Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite, handful of others where they can go, we have 100 million X, like I think Fortnite's at like 253, 300 million users. Like when you have that many people, it's a lot easier to go, hey, here, let's put a thing in front of you. And, and then you can have Roblox or Fortnite get millions of users, tens of millions of users. I think that small startups that are going into the space need to not go like, okay, so can we get you to? It's like, no, you don't need to do that. Like, can you create an amphitheater in the park that people can go and do karaoke to? Can you then have those moments where someone doesn't do karaoke, but it's actually them singing? Like, let's start with some basic stuff, but don't give me a 2D video stream. If I want a 2D video stream, I can go to Twitch. Like, we don't need to be creating new platforms of old technology. We need to make things real, virtual, 3D, persistent, online. That's what we need to build. Build things where people could, that go towards notions of Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, that go towards Neuromancer and Count Zero and other things by William Gibson. Let's build those early bits of cyberspace that can actually feel like a metaverse. And that means build a real-time rendering on-device thing that connects into servers and cloud, and it runs a thing and people can inhabit it. We can get to, to VR goggles and presence, but let's just start. And this is where the traditional gaming comes in, with things that can connect in PC and console and mobile into, in cross-play, cross-device, into one persistent world where we understand, never mind, like VR is cool and I love it, and VR and AR and MR, but device by device, start with PC because it's the easiest. That's what we develop on. Add in console, because that is where the greatest monetization is. That's where the users are most engaged. Add in mobile, because that's the largest. Get to VR because it's the most immersive. Get to eventually to AR because it is the most comfortable. Do that whole spectrum, but step by step, pull everything into one world. Build an example of that and show people that you can make a thing where people can go in and express themselves. They can build an avatar to inhabit the world and understand and interface with the world. And that avatar is not a chat window. An avatar is a 3D thing that you paper doll dress, you walk it around and you say, that's me. And that avatar, and I know I'm preaching a little bit here, but like that avatar, an avatar is a thing that it can be exactly who you are. It can be who you want to be. It can be who you think you are. It can be who other people think you are. It's about identity. People who build concerts without avatars, like Fortnite understood that, like, you start with, take a 3D thing, make an avatar, let people be in there. They have some immersion, they have some attachment. They're like, hey, I'm being seen. I see you, we see each other, we're in this thing together. Take it into VR eventually, and that's great. But just start with like third person, first person, third person, but like third person's a little bit better because you can see the character, you can see your own character, you can see their animations, you can see how they emote and interact and engage. But just like get that thing running smoothly. This is what Roblox and Fortnite have learned across every device imaginable. It's a lot of hard work, but it ensures that people are like, oh, I need to go home from work and jump into this game, into this world. Oh, there's a concert coming on. I don't have time to do that. I'll just pull out my phone. Like, let people engage from any device that they want to into your world. Build one world well, build it so that people can interface with it in different ways, grow that thing over time. Like that's one of the biggest, it's like, I love making lots of games. I want to build worlds now. It's like the old origin mantra, we create worlds. We need less people building offline single player experiences. I love them, done them. We learned about the internet. It's a thing. Take your shit online. Make it persistent so that people can come back to it. Show that there is change. Make a thing that exists beyond us. Build it so that it keeps existing, that people can share and see the record of each other.
Would I be right in saying so almost a digital reality? It's not necessarily a mirror of our world, but
Yeah.
well, like you said, you're building worlds, and
Yeah.
so they must evolve. They can't. Life is not static.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing is that there's a time for shipping a thing on a disk, and honestly, that time started to go away in the early 2000s. Like we got to like, hey, we can do a patch, and then it became a day one patch. Which is just it's the nature of software development and the creative part of that. We're trying to make the best experience. We're trying to optimize. We're always trying to fit more in, and getting it to the point of where that thing exists up there on a server in the cloud, and people can go in together. Like I know that there's a chunk of the old guard that believes that we're basically building a novel, and that you read it and then you put it away and it's done. But the world has mostly moved on from that. I still love that, but you can create those experiences within a shared world. And a shared world is the thing that we understand now from the internet. And it is the thing that the metaverse, when we're able to bring it together, it will be these patchworks of shared worlds.
That's one of the things that I like about coming out of Ready Player One is you can build a story
Mhm.
into an interactive environment, and then you can have yet a
Yeah.
separate world where it's open,
Mhm.
and users can
Mhm.
add to, delete from, and
Yeah.
so you get to have, well, we don't want to limit, right? We want to have everybody
Yeah.
being able to do whatever the human imagination can handle. You've mentioned tech quite a bit and its importance. What are we leveraging now? You mentioned cloud.
Mhm.
That's pushing where we're going forward.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. So first I'll rewind back, which is that so one of my mentors, a fantastic software developer and still one of the smartest humans that I know, John Carmack. John was always like I consider John to be the primary designer for its software through all of their games. He didn't design the levels, but he was always the one. And like I saw this in action, on Rage and Doom, but he would step in and go, "This is what's possible." That with good software development, you go, what can we actually do on this software and this hardware and these operating systems at this point in time? You don't start with what story can I make, or I want to make this exact experience, because like that's how you go down the rabbit holes where you lose time. Like John would talk about how like they did Doom, and then going from Doom to Quake, um, that they started off with the notion that Quake was going to be this giant spanning RPG, and then they couldn't build that. And so there's a point where he's like, you know what? We can make another shooter. We can make it faster and we can take it fully into 3D, but we cannot make this, like what Quake was originally supposed to be. Like they were a bunch of old RPG hounds also. Um, you know, um, Sandy Peterson, Tom Hall, John Carmack, you know, John Romero, a bunch of those guys, they all got together and played Dungeons and Dragons. They were like, Quake is going to be our Dungeons and Dragons. And then they're like, oh, we can't actually make that on the technology now. So knowing what you can make, knowing what is possible, how far you can take it, like whether you're id Software or you're Pixar, you excel not by going, what's the best story to tell? You excel by going, how far can we push the technology And then what experience can we tell within that? You go like, okay, we can push it just a little bit further. We can do a few cool things here. Let's bring this into the experience. And so that's something that I've always, it's been ingrained to me. I saw that at Looking Glass when I was there. I mean, I was at ID 10 years later and talking to John about that and asking him, like, because I was at Looking Glass, when we were kind of competitors, Looking Glass and Bungie and id Software and 3D Realms. But, like, we were all trying to do the same thing when 3D was early. 3D is doing a lot better now, and the GPU has matured, and now we're going into AI, and AI is becoming more of a thing. Also, we're seeing where VR tracks, and the immersion that it can bring. But one of the biggest things that we can do in the next 10 years in the games and interactive space is better AI in multiple areas, where you go, hey, for the last 20 years, we've given about 5 to 10% of our rendering, about 10% on average of our rendering to AI. Most of our rendering goes towards graphics. Then physics and AI and interactivity and gameplay and audio and a handful of other things, but they're all crammed into here. Like, you do a system profile on vast majority of the games in the past 20 years, and graphics is like this and everything else is like this. And there's this cycle, but now we're getting to the point where the graphics are getting reasonably realistic. We can grow a little slower there, but the best way that we can expand out that other side and have better physics, have better AI, have better audio is pushing that into the cloud. Microsoft has been particularly good at this. Microsoft, to be fair, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon all have different services around this. Microsoft has more that are game focused because they have Xbox, they have use cases. But you go, hey, physics, we can push a bunch, we can pre-process physics destruction sets, push that into the cloud, and then pull those when we need them. Microsoft has done a bunch of stuff with audio pre-processing, where back in the days at Looking Glass, when I was making the Thief games, we had some of the most complex audio because we modeled the entire environment. We made sure that the audio could travel, that audio and AIs could both pass through the environment everywhere. They understood occlusion, they understood open and closed doors and windows and things like that. And they understood the physicality and surfaces of the entire level structure. You can push that into the cloud and you can have fantastically rendered audio if you have audio support in the cloud for your game or experience, so that you don't have to run it real time. The biggest area is AI, having responsive AIs. But it's not just like, hey, we make the AI really good and the AIs are really fast. It's like, well, you can do things like machine translation and go, hey, how about if we put people in different regions together and we give fast text translation so that people can text in one language and they see, and somebody else sees the result in another language in real time. Google's got particularly good machine translation. They've all got solid, but Google's is, to be fair, some of the best out there, and it's because they started doing that for mobile, for phones. So it's taking these things and going, hey, we learned that an AI assistant can do these things. Let's push that into a virtual world. Let's take this piece of translation and natural language processing. Let's take some NLP and some NMT, jam them together, put them into a virtual world, and then we can have someone who, like, we could have an AI who speaks to people in different languages at the same time, or allows them to talk to each other. So it's that sort of stuff. It's using AI in the background for discovery and curation in stores, and not having just, hey, what do your friends like, but also suggesting stuff. TikTok is behind the scenes. TikTok is heavily an AI system that builds a social media network by suggesting just the right things at just the right times. TikTok is massively AI. And so it's like, hey, you want to build a sticky virtual world, do your AI like TikTok, and you just might. um, there are all sorts of possibilities here, even beyond the notion of, can you have a music world with thousands of people in it together? Um, if you ship it on a disk or use traditional processing, and you're running heavily on someone's local machine for that, no, you can't. But if you push a bunch of that to the cloud, you can. So you can build simulations like Microsoft Flight Simulator. You could have complex weather that's being imported from the real world, and that is making your skies come alive. There are all these things that you can do when you go render the scene on the device so that it is as smooth and responsive as possible. Because people talk about like, oh, 5G and cloud will just mean that everything streams in. Yeah, that works if you're within about 90 miles of the renderer. If you're not, you're going to get shitty ping. You're going to get lag. You're going to get latency. We cannot solve physics. We do not have wormholes that transport signals across faster than the speed of light. And so the best thing to do still is either render on device or have the server in your basement. I'm generally good with rendering on the device, but then add to that and go, right now, there's all these other things we can layer in through cloud services. Any virtual world should be cloud connected, and people should start cherry picking things to add to build out and make their world more robust.
So cloud plus edge sounds like the magic formula right now.
Yes,
Got
absolutely. Yeah, much more than 5G. Like, I love 5G. You know, my phone's on 5G. It's great, but I'm not convinced that any one piece of tech is just going to be life changing. You know, Starlink satellites, 5G, cloud. None of like game changing is putting things together and making a good structure and a good design. It's not like technology that on its own, like, hey, 5G is going to do this, Starlink is going to do this. That's marketing bullshit. Like, it's great. Somebody paid for that. A bunch of people believe it and start posting articles about it. But the reality is that when you make a good piece of software that changes how people understand and experience, it's never because of one thing. It's because a team of developers sat down and said, I can take this from here, this from here, this from here, this from here, and make something new.
100%. We're not emotionally connected to 5G, but I love the fact that you mentioned earlier about the TI-99. My first computer was a Texas Instruments home computer. Loved playing the game Parsec, sliding in the cartridge. Just, it was great. So putting that into context of time periods, Farm Aid, Live Aid were huge, huge deals. So what you were talking about is super inspirational in terms of, I was imagining the first global somehow to figure out the time zones, maybe that, but this event that's global, that's music, that's powerful, that pulls the world in, captures that attention for most likely a good cause, hopefully a good cause. That's nice. And that creates a shared communal experience. And if we could do that around the globe, using real-time translation so everybody can communicate to you, wow. I mean, that's game changing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the thing is we forget sometimes that we really have come a long ways. I played back on the TI-99, that was the machine I learned to program on, and I was messing around in BASIC and like finding things in magazines and being like, okay, this, but then Parsec and Hunt the Wumpus and crazy stuff back then, but we keep looking for what the devices can bring to us at the time. Right now, the primary devices, like I love the XR range. I'm a heavy proponent of it, but I also recognize that the XR range is kind of like the GPU. Like you can, like I think I bought my first GPU in '96. Um, and GPUs were great, but for a long time, people were like, "What's that, and why do I need it?" And you had to sort of slowly build up the use case for it, to where like, okay, GPUs were a thing on PC as a big add-in card, and then they got brought into consoles and they became a standard component in consoles. And then GPUs, as part of the system on a chip, became part of mobile. Like there's a steady growth. XR is kind of doing the same thing. Like it needs, Qualcomm talks about 30-year hardware cycles. The GPU is a mature thing now because it's been basically 25 years. We mostly know what that is. We'll see where we go with ray tracing, but now a lot of the push for NVIDIA and AMD is a greater variety of GPUs to fit different form factors and also pushing support into the cloud. So we grow over time. XR is in an earlier space, but where to that notion of that concept that you're talking about, what we need to do is like set up these consistent worlds and ensure that it's like, hey, maybe I'm connecting to it on my PC, but there might be a there might be a 15-year-old in Ohio who's connecting into it on a PS5, and there might be a 30-year-old in Beijing who's connecting into it on on the latest Huawei phones. Like whatever the device is, ensure that people can connect into the same thing. um, get them a UI UX that is good for their device, and allow them to join in and experience the thing together. We still need to optimize for different devices. We need to understand that controls and functionality and rendering on a phone versus a computer versus a console have a lot of different range. And even within there, when we did the Lil Nas X concert, there were devices as old as an iPhone 5S connecting last year. Roblox has a massive young population. They, in that, they then understand a lot of kids, 8 to 18, a lot of kids have hand-me-down devices. Roblox doesn't have to have the best, flashiest, fastest engine. They need to have an engine that can still run reasonably well on modern devices. But what if that kid has a 5 or 10-year-old device? Roblox's mantra is don't leave them out. So, it's like find your audience, find the sweet spot of what you want to do, but build a thing for your audience that can allow as many people as possible to come together and build that section of the metaverse.
That's beautiful. I love your energy. So, which is I'm gonna change things up. Typically, I ask how can people find you, but I want to ask you,
Mhm.
what do you want to leave behind? What impact do you want to have made on the world through your work?
Mm. Um, Honestly, I'd like to be able to create platforms and experiences, uh, technology and games and a variety of things that people can learn from, and can grow from and add to. Um, what I find is that as a creator, I learn from others who came before me. I always want to very much acknowledge that I stand on the shoulders of others, and like we all we all stand on each other's shoulders. We all learn, and it's a steady process. So I want to create things that can have an impact on a wide variety of consumers. Um, I've done some of that just in traditional games, like go, okay, I put this game out, and a ton of folks have played, like, Mass Effect 1, or a Need for Speed or Tony Hawk or other thing that I've worked on, but putting things out that are a little bit more personal to me, um, but where not only can users and players and consumers experience that thing, but other folks who are going to follow that road to creation can sit down and go, okay, this is how they did that, and this is why they did that. And if I want to make something better, I start from this and then I jump off. Um, so I mean, it's something that John would always talk about in terms of id Software, that he would make their older games open source, um, because he wanted people to go in and muck around and take them apart. I think that it should still be possible to do that for, virtual online persistent worlds, and not just for a game that's shipped on a disk. Let people learn from it so that they can be part of that next generation, that 5, 10, 20, 30 years, they surpass you. That, I mean, that's frankly how I see that we get to the metaverse. Um, which, like, there's a lot of hype about it right now. It's great. It's helping, frankly, it's helping shit to get funded. But like, we're not going to have the metaverse tomorrow. We're not going to have, Ready Player One in 5 years, but we get closer to that. And it takes time. And I've been around long enough to know that you need all of us like toiling away to get to that thing. So if I can put out, myself and my team and the folks that we collaborate with, we can build things that influence others and get them further on that path. Um, I believe good science fiction that envisions the future often influences us, and good software that shows a next step allows people to plan out 5 steps down from that.
Well, Raphael, if people take your legacy, and having just met you, I can see and hear and feel your empathy that you have towards others, and the humility as you respect your peers and your mentors, and the history that you stood upon for your own career. And I can only see that as a massive benefit to what happens in the metaverse and the gaming community moving forward. And I really thank you for your time.
Thank you. And just to leave you with one last thing. So, being frank, I joined the game industry when there weren't that many people of color. It is hugely important. It's incredibly important that people see a wide and diverse range, that they see possibilities of people like themselves, that give them hope and inspiration that they can go into something, and that they see the possibility that they can even push that further. It's incredibly important. A metaverse notion can be an egalitarian thing, but it only is if we actually push it to that and do that together. It's incredibly important that we build teams and collaborations that are diverse, that we are not afraid to promote people, and hire and promote and mentor people of a diverse range of gender, race, ethnicity, age, immigration, other backgrounds, religion. We need more diversity in there, because it's like planning out the web. You don't want it to just be one thing. You want it to be there for everybody. To be there for everybody, it has to actually reflect everybody. And so we need more people. And just being frank, I was one of very few people of color in most of the early companies that I was in. I was never the only one, but there were very few women, very few people of color, and the folks who were LGBT mostly tried to be undercover. Like, you try to keep as low a profile when you're different. Broadcasting out that there are safe spaces, recruiting people actively and saying, this is a good developer and they will also bring a unique voice of any type that is new, that is different. It will make what we're all building together better. And it will specifically help. Like, there are points where I will go like, okay, I have to put together a group here, and I will have, being frank, more traditional white male hetero game developers, because I go like, I have to anchor this thing for credibility for investors or publishers. But as we grow, training and giving experience to people of a diverse background will mean that they can more easily take those roles of leadership. We need a wider variety of people voicing their experience and leading. And the only way to get there is by steadily believing, like, take people in whatever you're working on, folks who are listening, from as wide a diverse background as you can, because they will make your thing better. It will be stronger. It will speak to a global audience better. I mean, fuck, learn from Disney. If Disney is like, hey, we need more diversity because it sells, yes. Disney does this because of money. It sells, it helps. If anything, all of us smaller folks, we can take greater risks than Disney. And in emerging technology fields, we have to, because it will make for a more robust and a safer space, but it will mean that the audience that you reach to will hear some of their own voices in you, and that's incredibly important.
Do you think that the metaverse, what makes that, because what I've seen is the concept of metaverse tends to draw more of that inclusivity. Do you think it's because of that idea of it doesn't matter this, but this that you project into the world, or is it just who's building it now? What's going on there?
I think I still see a lot of the folks that are building it are not as diverse as they could be. So I mean, I think there's an open challenge to startups, to studios that are going into this area. Make diversity in your teams, in your team, in your studio, in your development group, a priority, because it will make for a better thing long term. It will make for a better future, but it will also better enable you to connect into a diverse global audience. And so I think that with VR and then XR and then Metaverse, we have a tendency to go, oh, it will just be better because it's this new thing. And that's not true. It will be better if we make it better. So like, to take VR as an example, you look at the range of the folks who particularly got VR game publishing dollars, and not like who is making anything in VR, but in terms of like game publishing dollars, those were concentrated around existing traditional studios and with very traditional white male hetero backgrounds, because VR game publishers who were funding largely went, well, the biggest thing is to mitigate financial risk. These folks have done this thing before, let's hire them. And so money has a strong ability to make existing trends continue. And the best way to balance that out is careful, steady work on a grassroots level by as many folks as possible. Because the money, like Disney or others, not just calling them out, Disney or HBO or, whatever, Warner, Sony, Universal, the media conglomerates, they will reflect whatever the audience in the end tells them to, because they want to sell. It starts with us as developers, as creators, as audience saying, this is what we need, and showing examples of it on our own scale. And enough of us do that, and that bubbles up, and then the large multinational corporations take notice.
Well, it's going to make sense from a fiscal standpoint.
Yeah.
One, you can make great games doing this. Just look at Assassin's Creed. I mean, they promote it when you log into the game, and then Valhalla, you can shift and kind of transition how you want to be. You don't have to pick one or the other. And then But there was some recent research that I heard about today where with Gen Z, they're, depending on which studies you read, but call it anywhere from 3 to 7% more, 3 to 7% more of Gen Z are saying that they identify with GLBTQI than previous generations. So if that's your generation that's starting to drive culture and is going to be coming out of school and spending that money, then you're going to want to have to listen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like using that Ubisoft example, and having, been in the industry for a while now, like I specifically remember there's a point where this initially came to the forefront about 10 years ago, where um, folks singled out Ubisoft and were like, hey, this is probably more than 10 years ago, because this was like when Ubisoft didn't yet still have female protagonists, never mind the choice, where this was when I was at BioWare, and Ubi was in the early days. I think that they had like AAC 1 and 2, and they're like, well, and there was an animation director who really just lodged his foot in his mouth, where he was like, well, doing a female protagonist would mean twice as much, twice as many animations, and it's just it would be all this extra cost. It's like, why would we do this? And it's like, you do it because at least half your audience wants it. You'll have some guys who want to have the choice. Like hell, I played, Chun-Li was my favorite back in the Street Fighter 2 days. She kicked ass. I liked her because of her moveset. But it's like if you set up greater choice, people find things in there, and maybe they want to identify with the character, maybe they want to identify with what the character does, what the character looks like, but you give them that choice. Ubisoft learned that. And they learned that the hard way, because they got criticized steadily. And then, they did a little internal soul searching and said, okay, let's try to put female playable characters into some of our smaller AC titles. So they did it with Assassin's Creed Liberation. And they're like, oh, people actually like this. And so then they're like, okay, let's put it into the big ones. Like, it's a sort of steady process for these big companies of realizing, like, oh, if you build for diversity, you actually make your audience happy and you give them more choice. And yes, it's an additional cost, but you sell more copies and you have more loyal fans, because they go, you gave me what I wanted.
Yes.
So
and obviously
it takes time.
And I mean, Mass Effect was huge in terms of the romance options, in being able to allow. So I was having a conversation a couple months ago with somebody who, having the option to play a gay man as a gay man himself was a huge moment growing up as a young game player, and who he ultimately came to be as an adult.
Yeah.
So games, we talk about, say we remove this part of the conversation, we just go back to the joy of playing games and those childhood memories and identifying with certain characters. Well, if our conversation is opening up the spectrum of who and what humanity is, then we would want our entertainment to mirror life.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that is exactly it. And people will make the argument, but like, oh, I really wanted to write for just this thing. So, well, is part of the problem in the writing? So like, so as an example, I would love to see Grand Theft Auto 6 have male and female protagonists. It's like, figure out how to write for that. It's not hard if you need to. There are fantastic, like, if you can't write a female character, I can recommend some fantastic women writers who can. There's some great ones out there, and they do good work, and they can shore up your inadequacies if you can't write a female character. Learn to fucking write. I mean, the reality is that that lots of folks are comfortable with a wide range, but having if you're doing a narrative, have a diverse writing room, in, however that's organized, allow people to bring different perspectives in. But I do think that it's getting harder at least for bigger games to be like, hey, we just have this one character that you have to empathize with, because the bigger the budget of the game is, the more that they are starting to realize that they are creating an avatar, and they need to reflect some amount of player choice. Like it doesn't mean that we can't still have the instances where someone's like, I created Pac-Man and Pac-Man is this, and you're like, okay, and eventually you're going to create Miss Pac-Man. She's going to be just as big of a hit. You can, but like you can go, hey, this thing is about Donkey Kong. You can have a particular iconic character, and that's okay. But the more that the writing and the world building is supposed to be about, real and deep characters that you're supposed to empathize with, giving some amount of choice, going like, hey, if GTA 6 is going to be 3 different characters, ensure that each one reflects a different perspective so that people can see different potential in there. And then further ensure that like as soon as you go into your character customization, that you can always make yourself as you want to be. Maybe you can play the pre-created character. Maybe you can create your own.
In terms of choice for color, is it just skin tone, which a lot of games offer, and then there's voices?
Mm-hmm.
But should we start bringing in ethnic sounding voices, right? Do we have somebody that sounds Latino? Do we have somebody that, well, I'm starting to see more African tones in
Mm-hmm.
film, not necessarily games yet, but do we start pulling in accents?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with care, I mean, what I would say there is that that just as you don't want to just go, hey, here's the model and you can change the skin tone. It's like, well, you can change the skin tone, but can we also change the facial features to have different ranges? Like I've seen some games where you could literally just change the skin tones. I'm like, now I look like a dark-skinned Polish guy.
Right.
It's like, like have some variety there, but yeah. So having having in the game industry done audio direction. I'm not an audio director, I'll just clarify, but I have worked as a game designer and writer with audio directors a number of times to work with folks in the studio, and have directed voice actors. More and more, we're trying to have a diverse mix, and ensuring that. So first off, regardless of exact voices, allowing the voice actors to be a diverse range is also good. Like one of the problems that we would sometimes have in the past is, and this wasn't just games, this is TV and film as well, is that you go, some people would go, hey, this is a ethnic character. Now we can cast an ethnic person. This is a generic character, therefore they must be white. um, and like that's a consistent problem of going like, oh, you only cast an ethnic person when you have an ethnic role, and then they need to talk with an accent. There are lots of human beings of a variety of races and skin tones who talk with a variety of voices. If so, it's one thing to say this particular character needs to represent a particular view or background or ethnicity. This is important to their character or to a subplot or other thing. Hey, these characters are dealing with the Russian mob, and this character needs to speak Russian. Great. There may still be some flexibility there, but you go like, no, this character by the fiction needed to have grown up in Russia. They might be, there are Asian Russians, but it's probably not African. That's okay.
Right.
But you just go like, hey, this person's defining character is this occupation or this hobby. Let them be anything. and see what you get. And in that, take the voices that you like and that you react to. And so, doing the majority of casting, as frankly race blind, is something that I believe leads to stronger performances. And it does mean that you go like, hey, um, sometimes you go, hey, we are thus going to take this character and reflect and change, and maybe we change parts of the background of the written character or their name to reflect the person that we've cast. That shouldn't be a problem. I mean, that's the thing that Hollywood does all the time, where they go, hey, so we just signed The Rock to do this thing, and now we need his daughter. Let's have his daughter not look like a white girl with blonde hair. Like, The Rock is half African American and half Samoan. He should probably look like he's got some color, and his cast daughter should too. Before that, maybe, like, just to go with wrestlers, maybe you were going to get John Cena, who's a white guy from Boston, Irish guy. Now you've got a African American Samoan guy. Therefore, other things cascade from there. But yeah, the main thing is, whether it's the skin tones, or it's the voices, or it's features, setting up diversity, and then surprising yourself, seeing what you fall into when you go, you know what, I want to go with this voice actor, and they bring something to the role, and what else can I build around that?
And so that's really where the focus on bringing as many voices into a company and a project really help is, we don't know what we don't know. One of my things as a person is to look for my cognitive biases, just so I can make better decisions in life and get the things out of life and do the things that I want to do without those unseen impediments. And so by just having people there that can give you different sides of a 20-side die.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, it's just basic things. Like, there was a point where we were pitching, and I still want to come back to this game, but we were pitching a Spectral. This was at the time, a VR project. We'll probably bring it back to first person, but a 4-player co-op VR project. And what I immediately got, so like, we started with the notion of like, okay, so Left 4 Dead will have like, as an example, similar games, like, hey, one female character and 1 or 2 characters of color. And so what we got back was like, well, from some of the female developers in the group was like, well, if we're gonna do 4 characters, why can't 2 of them be female? Like, why does it have to be 1? And then beyond it, it's like, well, maybe we even expand out. It's like, well, if we do the rigs carefully, we can expand out from an initial set of 4 to another set of 4. But let's can we keep gender parity, and in order to make the games more inclusive, especially when women, we're seeing pretty consistently on PC console that women play co-op games, much more frequently than men do, for their proportion. Effectively, women want to play social action games. It's like, well, then let's give them options. Let's not just give them 1 character to play. Let's go, hey, here's our first set of 4, and they're 2 men and 2 women, and they're racially diverse. And then here's the next set of 4. I'd love to be able to keep rolling out playable characters. And if that game gets legs, we plan 16. But it started with a notion of like, okay, Left 4 Dead was revolutionary for having any female characters, back in 2008, 2009. Can we do better and maybe have equal gender parity? Yeah, we can start there.
I like your attitude about just recognizing and doing better. You're not beating anyone up or yourself up for not having done something at a certain point in time, but just trying to move the ball forward. And I think we're at a really great point in time. COVID might have been one of the best things for our culture that we've ever seen, in terms of we all were attached to our devices because we weren't in meet space hanging out.
Yeah.
And so those voices, a variety of voices, got to see it with the Asian community, with women, with the Black community, where it was just here in your face, and it brought it to the public consciousness. And
Yeah.
it's been a good dialogue overall, I think.
It absolutely has, and it's funny in that it led to we now have a chip shortage,
Yes.
semiconductor chip shortage, and that's because we bought so many devices in the last while. It's literally because everyone's like, oh, I'm at home, and I was like, hey, I had an iPhone 6, and got a couple of Android phones, but I was like, it's time to upgrade to my, let's get a new phone, 12 Pro. It's
Yeah.
like, but it's like device after device. We're all buying extra devices and a wider range of devices and more ways to connect, and then it both helps us to find new ways to get into the virtual, and it also shows how many different form factors we like to enjoy. Um, you know, Wearables, watches have seen a tremendous amount of growth. I think that the pandemic was actually quite good for VR, and it is going to continue to be so, because it made people realize, like, oh, that's a cool new immersive thing I can do, and I can do it from the privacy of my own home. It made it harder for location-based entertainment, but that's starting to rebound. People like it doesn't feel like there's a zero-sum game with like home VR to LBE, or from, frankly, virtual concerts to real concerts. Real concerts are going to start to happen again, slowly and carefully. And we're still struggling with this pandemic. People are starting to push back out into the world, but I do think, to your point, that there is a renewed understanding of the importance of the virtual. It is a little weird in that, for those of us who have been in gaming and 3D for a long time, that the virtual was kind of conflated with video. It's like I've been, like, I started using Zoom in 2016. I think I started using Skype in 2006. I love video and video conferencing and audio conferencing, but I don't think of that as virtual. Like, to me, it's like when we went beyond MUDs and we went into even 2D and 2.5D rendered worlds. That's virtual. MUDs on BitNet was almost virtual. It was getting there. But when we can go, like, hey, like, I, I remember when UO launched, and it was like, oh, this is Ultima Online. This is a thing. It's like Ultima, but it's just the world, and the story is us running around together. And then people are, building houses on the one hand and roaming around, and then figuring out, like, how do I kill Lord British?
After UO, the first time I played EverQuest, which was arguably the next big one after,
Yeah.
that to me, that changed me. I was looking around and just flabbergasted at the experience. And if
Yeah.
you look at it today, you're like, oh my God, what is this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is, like, the worlds steadily grow. Like, I remember designing up parts of the world for, uh, like, there's a whole sequence where I was just banging on building open worlds, like we shipped True Crime to New York City, and then Gun 2, which got canceled by Activision. But like for Gun 2, and the graphics were earlier back then, but that was supposed to be like a cross-generational title. But, like, we had, like, a loose replica of, like, Mount Rainier in there, for those of you who know Mount Rainier from the Pacific Northwest. Like, building, like, we've constantly been sort of trying to build bigger scale and greater fidelity, and take elements from the real world and mash it into these virtual worlds, and make virtual worlds that are more and more complex and convincing, from that UO scale up to, I mean, never mind Fortnite, but, like, things like, Red Dead Redemption 2, where or one of my favorites recently, Microsoft Flight Simulator, which, like, Microsoft Flight Sim is another good example of, like, you're rendering on device, but like, that's a game that runs in the cloud, because it's this whole other level where you go, they have roughly 2 terabytes of data. Um, you don't want to fit that on. It's like, yeah, you could take all the data in Microsoft Flight Sim for flying around the globe, and you could mash it onto a hard drive. It's not going to fit on an well, onto most SSDs, but it's like, having that data, and they're steadily updating it, but and they have a real-time weather system that they're actually pulling weather from, rendering it on the cloud, and then pulling it down. But having terabytes of world data, is a thing that's now possible, whereas UO, you could still basically fit UO on, like, a CD. So, like, the amount of data has increased dramatically, and will keep doing so as we build more and more fidelity.
Here's a quick
Um,
question for you.
yeah.
So one of the things about cyberpunk that I was really excited about was
Mm.
you're supposed to be able to go inside buildings and just cruise around, just random pull over and walk in. But they locked them and with their little red lock. How far are we away from that level where we can have a metropolitan city and we can
Oh,
truly walk in and out?
we're absolutely there. So that's the thing, is that that was a design choice by them. Keep in mind, like, when we did, True Crime New York City, and we GPS, modeled, Manhattan. um, we we at one point were like, okay, let's be able to go into, maybe not every building, but lots of buildings, most buildings. But then, like, in order to do that, we were like, right, we have to have a team that does modular interiors, um, and we have to have a random crime system that spawns gameplay in there. So we had to have a system. This is when I was at Luxaflux back in this was like the 2004, 2005 timeframe. So this was PS2. And in True Crime New York, you could, like, there was the specific interior missions, and there's, all the bustling activity outside. But we had a modular interior system to spawn, when you went up to a door, and it would say, okay, this building can pull from these types, of interiors, and it can pull from these random crimes, and some would be empty, and some would have things going on. But it's entirely a choice of, you have to take the time, and the development team has to build this out and give it purpose. It's both work to create it, and then reason for why it exists. And Cyberpunk, in many respects, wanted to have a more linear game. They wanted a linear game in a non-linear open world setting, but they weren't really trying to make GTA.
Right. Yeah. So that's exciting because going back to that
Yeah,
immersive experience, you want to be able to have it more realistic. That's what we're driving for.
exactly. Yeah, no, that's very much something. I mean, not to do the exact true crime thing, but, let's just say that if I was to build if I and my team were to be building an open world city in the near future, we would have
Understood.
that.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, yeah, and reasons for it. It depends on your type of game. Like, yeah, if we're making a GTA style game, then you're probably running through those spaces shooting. But I'm at least in the near future, I'm much more interested in, can we create a city or world where there can be music and performance, and you can still have reasons to explore, um, and but creating public spaces and private spaces that people can navigate between. You don't necessarily want to go, like, hey, I can go into anybody's room. Like, if it's, I'd like to be able to create private spaces and private rooms, and being like, hey, people can't bust into your particular, like if everyone's got a bedroom in the virtual, you should only be able to invite the people in that you want to. um, but you can also have a whole host of buildings and things that people can go in and explore that can be more public, and frankly, allow, populate it with AIs, cloud-based AIs that people can go and talk to and explore, and who can impart knowledge and experience and share stuff and trade and become new friends. You don't want everybody, you don't want every door that you knock on to be another human beings, because we are only on when we're ready to be on, but AIs can be there all the time. And so if you populate your world half with AIs, they're always waiting for the players.
And that's fantastic. I mean, one of the things that I liked about old school WoW was how communal it was.
Mhm.
And you had people, you were just running down a street somewhere and people are like, "Hey, can you help me?" And you're sure, and you just go run
Yeah.
off. But there, you didn't have that element of privacy unless you tried to climb up a mountain somewhere and do whatever. So being able to instance some sort of private
Yeah.
environment, and that would be cool for the whole music thing, right? You have your thing you want to do beforehand, you
Mhm.
have the experience, and then there's that group area that everybody wants to possibly hang out afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah. No. So think of it like, hey, you're going to go to a concert, but before you go to the concert, you're going to gather your group together. Like lots of people go to concerts. Well, pre-pandemic, with a social group. It's like, hey, if you can go into the virtual, then start out in your home, go over to somebody else's, pick them up, go over to somebody else's, party and hang out because you still have some time. Maybe you put on a track from the artist, or people are sharing and trading stuff, memorabilia, collectibles, clothing, back and forth, and then they're ready to go. They're going to go off to the two-story theater, rock theater that they're going to enjoy this at, and there they're going to interact with other people. But yeah, having social and mixes of personal and private and group and public in the virtual is incredibly important if we want it to be as robust as it can be in real life. So always taking lessons from real life and then distilling it down into structures so we can do it a little bit easier, a little bit more efficiently in the virtual.
When you do release said unnamed project, we'll have to do another show together to talk about it,
Absolutely.
because one of the cool things that I love about music is I've never met a person that hates music ever.
Yeah.
And that's about as human as you can get, and it's ancient,
Mhm.
which is cool. So when we talk about the metaverse in combination with music, that's super
Yeah.
appealing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, my father was a music professor, so music has been
Nice.
in the blood and in the exposure since I was little. So yeah, creating spaces for music and casual experiences around music, but also, if you think of it, it's around performance as a whole. Music and dance, maybe elements of graffiti or painting murals, and like there's individual dance and group dance, and there's a whole host of arts and culture around music that frankly needs to go into the virtual. And I will say, just to continue on that for a quick second, beyond like, hey, we can take the next big artist in, it's like, hey, we're going to be taking a Billboard #1 artist into Roblox in August, and it'll be fantastic. But there are, music teachers and aspiring performers and, folks who are on much smaller stages who also want to get into the virtual, and there isn't really the space for them in a Fortnite or a Roblox, or similar. And so I hoping and that people can, if we can create something in that space, that people can find a reason to go in for a variety of sizes of performances, that it's not just for it's in the same way, like I keep coming back to like YouTube, like people will go on and watch YouTube or Twitch, or TikTok, just song after sequence after short clip after movie. um, I'd like to see that provided in the virtual, that there should be an ability to create lots of different sizes and scales and types of performance. Because I think that there are a lot of people who've been asking for that, and would like to see that beyond 2D video.
It'll be awesome once that's built to see the
Yeah,
creativity that people come up with. It's mind blowing every time there's a new social platform, what people come up with and the
absolutely.
variety that comes out of humanity.
Yeah.
So this was really organic and we just kept going. But I mean, are
Mhm.
there social platforms that you're active on that you do, or Twitter or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, so I've honestly been meaning to get onto Twitter more. I've been on Facebook and LinkedIn a great deal, and I post on LinkedIn and Facebook. On Facebook, I do run a few different groups beyond just posting as an individual. On Facebook, I run the Colors in XR, the XR Alliance. There's another one, GEXI, which is Games, Entertainment, XR, and Interactivity. And then I'm an admin for Virtual Realities, which is, I think, the largest VR group on Facebook with about 60,000 members. So yeah, I've been very active on Facebook and LinkedIn. I've been deficient on Twitter. I think I literally created a Twitter account back in like uh, in like 2010 or 2011 to mostly follow John Carmack, my old boss's tweets. But yeah, I'm going to be over the course of the next few months posting more on Twitter to kind of continue to raise the profile of this, and to see if not only can we go towards a metaverse, but can we go towards a music verse.
Love it. And
So we
all
shall
of
see.
those, all of those links will be in the show notes for sure. Uh,
Yeah.
Wrap up question. When do you sleep? I mean, largest group on Facebook, building an entire company. Wow. This is,
um I in bursts. I do what I can, but this is a good time for productivity and growth. So, we've got a game dev group. We've got a bunch of technology and platform building in the background, and I'm just uh, trying to be part creative and part train conductor. Keep things going, keep my teams fed and happy and energized, and try to keep everybody on a vision to make bigger things.
Rafael, I learned from you on this call, so I have no doubt that people who watch and listen to this are going to learn as well. And once again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.